So let's jump through those topics one-on-one and see where we go. The first one, huge conversations going on here, something that I've been talking about personally about this, like challenging this model overall literally since 2017 and then getting more vocal about it on the internet as early as 2019. But the SDR predictable revenue model is being challenged at the moment. It's being challenged because the effectiveness has gone down dramatically as the demand in most categories has declined with the economy and the increasing interest rates and the lower availability of funding and things like that. And so people are challenging the model overall. What is the challenge? Based on what I see in the data, these programs do drive revenue. They drive, like if you look at data across mature companies, we're talking 15 to up to 30% of revenue coming through an outbound motion, which is a considerable amount of net new revenue. So it's not like we have to be like, this sucks, like we're getting no impact from it, let's just give up on outbound. But the problem is that the ROI of the investments that are driving 15 to 30% of the revenue are incredibly low. Estimated CAC payback periods 36 to 60 months, where at one point it was probably 18 to 24. And at this point, getting a little like untenable to the place where companies are saying we're just going to cut half the SDR headcount and then hope that we get the same output or same efficiency with half the people, which is it's actually possible that something like that would happen. But I think there's going to be deeper challenges on the model overall. The things that my brain goes to is who actually does the job. What are the KPIs that determine whether that job is successful or not? What are the activities that people do to achieve those KPIs or objectives? I think are three core things that we need to be looking at. At the talent profile level, if you buy into the fact that bulk spam email. There's actually some conversation going on today with recent Gmail like privacy updates that they're rolling out in February of 2024. That like spam bulk email is going to be under huge scrutiny in terms of spam and inboxes. It already has been. It's getting lower and lower, but will be under more scrutiny starting in February. And so if we believe that we need to be leaning into one-to-one email and personalization and using signals to determine who we email and why, that then it would lead you to the idea of like, who's the right person to actually do that job. And I don't believe that it's the same talent profile that companies have hired for 10 years to like bang the phones and man the spam cannons like Outreach or SalesLoft. So talent profile's got to change. What are the KPIs this function is scored on? Historically has been meetings and historically has been on a variable comp plan. I think that both of those should be under consideration as to how the comp plan is actually comprised and what metric you actually want to either pay or incentivize those functions to accomplish. And so there's a lot of action in there. Some company, like I talked to one company that was considering, not doing, but considering, which I think is really interesting, to take their sales reps and the sales reps then become business development and early stage sales, and the SDRs go away and the SCs, the solutions consultants, become late stage deal closers. Recognizing the idea that selling something today requires a lot of technical and subject matter expertise that some AEs just simply don't have. And so that's super, super interesting. Not that everyone should go out and do that, but just giving you an angle about how some people are thinking about it. Okay, we'll just bounce around on topics. Another thing that I think companies are finally going to start thinking about in 2024, actually, I know this to be true because I interact with many of them. Companies are finally going to challenge the strategy that they bring to paid social, especially companies that spend a lot of money on digital and demand and advertising. Historically, companies have used this as a lead gen channel. Even the companies that we analyze today that are, some of them in the top 100 cloud companies in the world on the Forbes list, and still spend 95% of their $1 million or more a year LinkedIn ad budget on lead gen campaigns for ebook downloads. And that has been the quote unquote best practice that companies have used for since social networks in digital advertising existed almost. I have been promoting, evangelizing a different way to do this. I started doing it in 2017 as an experimentation. I started talking about it on the internet in 2019 about how companies should think about using paid social as guaranteed distribution of content to target accounts. When we think about what is the actual purpose of content, what is the purpose of content is that it's meant to be consumed. And once consumed, changes the perception of your target customer so that they are more likely to consider or actually take action on purchasing or exploring your product. We got to write that down in a blog or something. That was the best definition of content that I've ever heard, I've ever come up with. I talk about this a lot. It needs to be consumed. And so where is, like, everyone on this call and the people listening to some of this stuff afterwards, like, the place where a majority of content is consumed today is within social networks and content platforms. Through and through. You consume probably 90% of the information on your mobile device through a social network like LinkedIn, TikTok, podcast, Spotify, YouTube, Hulu, Netflix, through a mobile device or other things like that are coming through these types of platforms. And so to know that your audience is using the platform and there's real consumption happening there in the feed, that instead of trying to get someone to download your ebook, which, by the way, if you look at the data, almost nobody actually even reads the PDF. They never get to the PDF to actually read it. You just get their email address on a LinkedIn ad, which is why they never buy from you. They never answer your emails and things like that. And so instead, taking that money and saying, okay, what do we want the customer to actually know? What is going to be important that impacts how they make a buying decision, or whether they talk about our product in the next meeting, or whether they try and solve this business problem? Why don't we take that and make it into compelling native content for LinkedIn and run media to all of our target accounts instead? We get less clicks. We don't have any MQLs to report on. We got to change the metrics and how we score the success of this channel. But fuck, it's going to work a lot better than what companies do right now. So I think smart companies have been doing this for years. I think that we'll see a larger mass movement of companies rethinking the paid social strategy for the core reason that the options are stop doing social media advertising or change the strategy, because what's happening right now in the data is literally awful for almost every company that we analyze. I think that there's going to be we see like some companies being successful with this, but a stronger movement with the integration of dark social content inside of a company's content strategy. Most companies build content for their website, and that's all they think about in terms of where content goes. And then every single place where they distribute content, they're really just distributing a link, hoping that you go back to the website. And so I think the companies will rethink how they have a content strategy. Yes, you need website content, but you're really missing the boat if you don't have a thoughtful, modern, dark social content strategy that involves a podcast, long-form video for a platform like YouTube, short-form video for all of the different social networks that exist for organic consumption. So I think companies will be really trying to integrate that level of content into their overall content strategy, because sitting back and waiting for someone to search for your blog and hoping that they find your blog on the 5th link in Google is simply not getting it done anymore. And as your TAM gets smaller, this becomes more and more important, using paid social and other forms of quote unquote outbound marketing to go out and get your target accounts, and having a more balanced strategy between demand capture and then moving some of that into demand creation, where you actively go out and target those people and give them information. I don't know if this is really fits the rest of the format here, but I'm compelled to talk about it, which is that we have this this polarizing debate between oh, don't rent your audience on LinkedIn. LinkedIn could change the algorithm and then you'll be fucked. Versus, so all you have to do is you need to build own media, put all your stuff inside of a content hub or on your website and do that. And So we have this, like, these people that are so pro-owned media shitting on quote unquote rented media, which really isn't rented, like LinkedIn or social networks, as well as paid media, using paid distribution to go out and target your target customers for like a insignificant amount of money to get in front of your target customer. And a polarizing view where you can't do all three of them. There's no way. You can only do one of them. And I think that really is the crux of this debate, is that people are so in a either or game instead of a and game. And so where I want to take this is where how I see all of these things coming together and being used properly together. Typically, when you look at companies, there are not that many companies that have been able to take a paid strategy and an organic strategy and fuse them together into something really powerful. And that's the way that social networks work for B2C companies, and that's the way that they should work in the future for B2B companies. And so let's talk through how that works. First off, I don't consider the distinction between owned media and rented media. I don't actually believe in that. The difference is whether you have their email address, is what people will say. I look at it between website content that lives on your website, whether it's gated or ungated, versus dark social content that lives on a different platform with far more reach and scalability. And so for the rest of the talk, I won't use the term owned media or rented media. I'll use website content and dark social content. And so companies build website content. So like that's one thing that's important. And then when you think about the other parts of the content, like dark social and things like that, the idea of fusing them together, here's how B2C companies do it. And I'll give you the distinction between how I did it in 2016. So let's start there. In 2016, we had no organic audience, and the algorithms are based on followers in 2016. So if you post content, you have no followers, you get no views. And so at that point, what we did was we made content. We made a bunch of content and hoped that it worked. And then we ran paid advertising against our target customer. And then based on the engagement of those paid advertisements, because we got the content in front of the right people, and then based on the engagement, then we decided what we posted organically. And given the adjustments in the algorithm, the present day best practice is almost the exact opposite flow, is that you create a lot of content, you publish it organically, you see what resonates organically, and then you take it and you either directly boost it or you re-architect and reformat the post to make it more performance driven, and then you run media against the same concept overall. So you're using the organic engagement to validate that the content works, and then take that validated content and run it on paid. So when you run it on paid LinkedIn, you're not guessing whether or not it works. And that's just because of how the organic algorithms have changed, allow us this opportunity where we don't have to spend money on advertising to guess on whether the content works or not. Another thing to think about is the mix of the content that you're trying to show a customer or a target account using a paid strategy. If you just run an MQL machine, you're not thinking about like a content mix at all. So let's look at this as if we're using paid LinkedIn advertising to guarantee that our target customers at least have the opportunity to see the content. And so if we do that, perhaps the mix is that we want to have 30% social proof. We want to have 30% focused on how our category is better than the status quo. We want to have 30% thought leadership from subject matter experts based on video content that's been validated organically already. And then we want to have a slice for 5 or 10% for experiments or other things, company news, other things that we deem important that we want our target customers to consume. And then you have an overall content mix where only some of the content is actually coming from your organic strategy, in this case 30%, not all of it. But some people really struggle with the idea of blending these two things together. What I laid out is sort of like a initial starting point that you could take to say, okay, we're going to think, just like what I mentioned, we're going to think about our paid social strategy different next year. We're not going to measure on MQLs, and we're not going to run gated content. We're going to do a content mix that guarantees distribution to our target accounts, X% here, X% here, X% here, X% here. Which of this content do we already create? Most companies, probably none of it, because they don't create a lot of dark social content. Okay, now we need a content engine to create this. We need to have the podcasts and things like that to support thought leadership, but we also need creative campaigns and creative people to start building this stuff for product marketing and social proof and things like that. The difference between the creative requirements to create a blog versus create a 1-minute LinkedIn piece of content that delivers high impact in your business, it's just a whole different skill set. And it's a whole different game. And it's a whole different level of investment that I think companies underappreciate right now. And so that's how I see, at a high level, how I see these two strategies hopefully being blended together, and hopefully we get out of the conversation of the polarizing view that, paid sucks, we got to do owned media instead, because that is absolutely not the case. Okay, next big topic cluster here, a lot of follow-ups from forecasting and planning workshops. So I'll hit on a couple of these where either some people just wanted my perspective on it, or it was a follow-up question that we didn't have time to answer. The first question, actually, let's see if I want to get this in a certain order. No certain order. First question: how do you factor in open pipeline to forecasting and planning? It's a great question, and something that I think is really interesting. Because my answer is by defining pipeline properly. And so basically you have, if you define pipeline properly, and pipeline is hero pipeline that your sales team wins at greater than 25. And from that point forward, you're going to have very predictable sales cycle lengths as well. So maybe on a 150-day sales cycle, your hero sales cycle is actually only 45 days. From the point that it reaches the hero stage until it reaches close one, which creates a lot more predictability and a line of sight from that point forward to the actual outcome. And when defined properly, then you could use some of the you could use basic forecasting tools, or you could use something like a Clary that just eliminates all of the low value, low quality pipeline that's going to impact your forecasting and planning for the short-term future. And then you have a whole different planning work stream, which is how much hero pipeline are we going to create? And so your forecasting to closed one is driven off of hero pipeline, and your forecasting for future quarters in terms of the pipeline production will be built off of how much hero pipeline you're creating during that period of time. And so companies just look at their open pipeline from stage 0 to closed one and try and forecast around that. But we found that actually breaking it up, defining qualified in a standardized based on performance way, and then making sure that you're connecting the customer journey and what's actually happening before the opportunity opens, and making that a key input to your future forecasting and planning. All of those become core insights. So that's how I would, basically, how do you factor in open pipeline? You only factor in pipeline that has hit a certain stage where you have very strong predictability in terms of win rates and sales cycles. Okay, next, I wrote this down, but I can't even read what I wrote. Hold on, let me pull it up to make sure. Oh yeah, okay. That word says new, not nav. How do you forecast a brand new product? So this one's interesting, something that I've been sort of, how do you say this? I've been doing at my company, right? We launched the Vault a couple of years ago. We've had some other sort of point solution products, and we have other things forthcoming. And so I'll say a couple of things on this. And when we're talking forecasting a brand new product, the assumption going in is that there's an existing product that your company sells that's already doing revenue. You're probably more than 10 million ARR if you're going to launch a second and try and sell a second product. If you're just selling a second product before 10 million ARR, you probably have the wrong strategy. And so that's the assumption going into it. It's not like, okay, we just raised a pre-seed round, we have no revenue, and it's a new product. So let's look at it as selling a product inside of an existing company that's successful. So the first thing is that I would not forecast into your company's actual financial model and projections that you're giving to the board about a product where you have no data, no success, no clear product market traction, no historical performance metrics. I believe that it would be irresponsible to go into next year with 0 sales and say that you're going to end the year at 2 million ARR for a product that you've never sold before. So you can have a stretch plan, you can have targets and aspirations of what you want to do, but whether you're venture funded or not, but especially if you're venture funded, committing to the board to that with no historical data, I think could set you up for some troubling situations potentially. Another thing to think about is that selling a second product inside of an existing company almost undoubtedly limits the upside and progress of the second product through and through. And what's the reason why? Because the reps that sell the primary product already know how to sell it and already make money off of it and all those different things. And so it's way easier for them to pitch and close. It's not the salesperson's fault, by the way. They're gold on revenue. This is their job. It's way easier for them to sell something that they've already been selling that the market wants and things like that. And you actually need an entirely different skill set for somebody that's selling something that you've never sold before. You need to be able to think on your feet and try different messages and collect feedback and be able to be flexible and change what you're actually selling to the customer based on what that customer needs so that you close your first customer. And a sales rep inside of a machine of a $10 million company or a huge company is not trained to do that and is probably not authorized to do those things. And so what happens? You don't find the exact pricing and packaging that match what your customer wants. You don't get the insights that then feedback. You don't close as many deals as that you could. You don't get the reps with customers to learn how to update the product and things like that. And so it's just a communication of caution that I think almost always launching a second product inside a totally different product. Sometimes it's going to the same customer. Oftentimes it's a new budget line item to a different stakeholder. Almost undoubtedly limits the upside of the success of the second product. Next one, people were looking for some benchmarks and things like that on how budgets are being split between programs and headcount. They were also looking for it based on different company size or what tier they've raised at or something like that. So let's just go through it. Generally, almost every company is going to have when they think about just programs versus headcount, and headcount includes agencies, freelancers, consultants, your fractional CMO. They don't have to be a W-2 employee to be in headcount. That generally the split is going to be somewhere between 45% headcount to 60% headcount, depending on stage and some strategic choices. It almost never is going to be 55 or 60% headcount unless the company is early stage and they just simply they spend $600,000 a year on marketing and they have 2 employees and therefore that already makes it 60% of the budget just by having 2 employees. And they have to scratch and claw with, $3,000-$5,000 a month in program and variable expenses. But once you reach some level of maturity, you're going to be hovering somewhere between 45 and 55% of total marketing budget on headcount, leaving the other 45 to 55% on all variable programs and expenses like that. So that's generally the split when it comes to that. The next question, going a little bit deeper, was what's the general divide in how companies think about their budget between demand capture and demand creation? And while we haven't perfectly figured out a way to assess this yet, because a lot of this comes down to subjective calls about whether it's some of the budget is for demand creation or demand capture. For instance, a trade show booth, a company that's not getting any MQLs that closed one on their trade show booth could argue that it's to create demand. because they don't have any measurable results around demand capture. But generally, it's a little bit subjective. So I'll just talk through what I've seen, but this is more of my opinion than fully backed by data. But I do see a lot of data, and I get the whole budget, $25, $30 million budgets from companies, and I look at every single line item. So this is, I guess, when I say it is backed by data. That companies spend less than 5% of their total marketing budget on demand creation. And almost all of it is to either do lead generation, actual demand capture based on intent, or to accelerate pipeline in existing deals. That's where all 95% of the budget goes to when you look at it. And then there's 5% that gets spent on PR, Gartner, AR, analyst relations and public relations, and then maybe $10,000 a month for organic social media content and a social media manager, and that's basically their entire demand creation strategy. Maybe they pull in a subject matter expert from product marketing, and they have them do an event every once in a while, and so some of that becomes subjective, but largely, it's not like we're anywhere close to 50-50. Like it's 90-10 at the absolute most generous that I could say, but it's really probably 95-5. That leaves a huge hole for companies. And even if the things that they could do for demand creation, right, run the LinkedIn strategy in a different way to create demand instead of get leads, they can't do it because of how they score at the success of those types of channels. And so part of it is that they don't think about demand creation and demand capture separately, so it all sort of funnels into lead gen. The second part of it is that even if you wanted to do some of these things in a B2B company, or even if you wanted to invest here, you wouldn't be able to effectively invest for a long period of time, because the way that the success of these programs are measured will show you that it's not working, even if it was crushing it and being your highest ROI program. So generally, companies just not thinking about demand creation and demand capture separately, and significantly underfunding both the resources and the programs related specifically to demand creation.